And the police minister this late afternoon in Alexandra Township. Now, the looting continues, even though it is ostensibly all hands on deck in terms of security forces. SAPS members on leave have been called in to help deal with the rioters and looters. The president decided to deploy the military. Although the powers of army members are limited, they are there to support the police. So let's look at the role of the SANDF in stopping what's going on. To discuss, we're joined by the director at African Defence Review, Darren Olivier. Mr. Olivier, thank you for being with us. Firstly, do SANDF helicopters in the sky and more boots on the ground, should it encourage people to refrain from looting? Because it doesn't feel like it's done that today.
It's always tough to say. I mean, when people are in a current approach where they're looting at such a large scale, it's difficult to say that merely adding a few soldiers or choppers would change that. I do think over time, though, they will tend to have an effect, and I think you'll start to see more and more of them rolling out and reaching certain areas. You know, it's only been the first day, and something worth bearing in mind is that for the first day, at least, a lot of that time is taken up by talks between the police and the military as to where to deploy and what to do there. So I think it's probably going to be a slower rollout over the next day or two. I know we've already seen the military in some places in Johannesburg, but I think it's very clear that they haven't gone to all the areas yet. So I don't think we should expect to have seen a big impact just yet. On top of that, I think we also should expect that for most cases, the military will be deployed probably further away from the rioting, because their main task will be to free up police to then go and do rioting. So I would expect the military to predominantly be used for things like roadblocks, for cordons, for patrols in certain areas, again, with the main objective of freeing up police.
So what you're saying makes sense. Our reporters are saying they haven't seen any SANDF members in Durban, for example. But yes, in Johannesburg, it seems the rollout has been a bit quicker. So 2,500 army members deployed. There are thousands and thousands. How many boots could technically be on the ground?
So, I think this is probably close to the maximum at short notice. The SANDF is actually quite a lot smaller than one would think. If you look at the size of it, I mean, the overall numbers are 73,000, but of that, 10,000 are civilians. The army itself only has about 34,000 uniformed personnel, of which only around 12,000 are actual infantry troops inside infantry battalions. Of those, at any given time, about 4,000 to 5,000 are on peacekeeping, border patrol, and similar tasks. And of course, at the moment, we have soldiers who are currently committed to going to Mozambique, which I believe will be deploying quite soon. I mean, the minister said this week. So there really isn't much scope for additional troops to come from most places. I mean, at best, they could call in the reserves, and they could add a few more thousand. But we're not going to look at, I think, much more than, at most, and probably after a couple of weeks, 8,000 or so.
So one of my questions was going to be, what does this mean for our involvement with SADC, with that standby force in Mozambique? So you say the people who are on standby for that will remain there, and then other troops will be used for what's going on in South Africa?
Correct, yes. So for the moment, that's a commitment, which I don't think we can get out of, given that it's treaty-based. If this carries on escalating, it is possible that South Africa may ask for a delay and then redirect those troops. So that could also be used to then bolster the numbers. But I think the key message here is that we can't rely on the army to really come and save the day here, because the army does not have many personnel.
Yeah, and we know the police are outnumbered. I guess we wanted to see this incredible show of force. You do say over time it could take some effect. And the deployment is under a certain section of the Constitution, and it's in cooperation with the SA Police Service. So that's been emphasized today, that the army is under the command of the police force. How does that work? Let's look at a practical example. So there's a mob of people, hundreds, approaching a shopping centre, say. The authorities can see that coming. What is the role of the police in that situation? What should be the role of the military if they're nearby?
So to clarify slightly, the military don't come under the command of the police and vice versa. What they do is they cooperate through a regional joint operations centre. Technically, though, typically the military will follow the lead of the police. So it'll be the police who determine where to deploy and what times and all the rest, because the military really may not operate independently. But command still rests with the military command on the ground. In the case you raised, the preference there would be for the military in general to form the outer cordon and for the police to then form the front line. But it would really depend on the situation, because when deployed in this fashion, SANDF soldiers do have effectively many of the powers of police. So they become full peace officers. They have the power to detain, to temporarily arrest before handing over to the SAPS. They have the power to conduct roadblocks, to halt, to ask people for documents and all the rest. So they do have some powers where they can act almost as police in the event that they're required to. So it would really depend on the environment. But typically what we've seen in the past is the SANDF prefers to be really form the outer cordons, which then frees up police to be the ones interacting directly with the public. Of course, not always true. It depends on the context. And soldiers are, given some training on how to deal with the public. But typically, for example, soldiers won't be equipped with less lethal ammunition, rubber bullets, and all the rest. So most of them will have live ammunition. So from their point of view, they're going to want to avoid too much being the ones in the front line.
Yeah, and of course they are trained differently for very different scenarios. All right, thank you. I think that clarifies a lot. That was Darren Olivier.